Hey there, how's it going? My name is David and you're watching Kai City RC. Welcome back to the channel and welcome to my Kyosho Ultima SB Dirt Master review. Henceforth, I'm just going to call it the Dirt Master. Now, before I begin, a couple of things I want to mention. First, if you haven't seen my unboxing and initial impressions videos, I'll put a link in the description below. Go check those out if you have time before continuing watching this video. Secondly, and more broadly concerning the reviews that I do on my channel, as you can imagine, the kind of kits, RC kits that you can buy vary considerably depending where in the world you are. Now, I am based in Japan and here the RC market is totally dominated by Japanese brands, specifically Tamiya, Kyosho, Yokomo and a handful of others. Now, while it's not impossible to buy RC kits from other makers, most hobby shops do not really stock kits or spares from companies like Traxxas or Lossy or Arma, FDX, etc. So just bear that in mind, most of my reviews I'm going to be comparing Tamiya with Kyosho or Tamiya with Yokomo or Yokomo with Kyosho. I don't really have much first-hand experience with other makes of RC. So onto the Dirt Master. What is it? Well, in essence, I believe the Dirt Master is Kyosho's answer to the G-Force hobby Genova. And judging by the online chatter here in Japan and the number of videos comparing the Genova to the Dirt Master, I think many other people are thinking the exact same thing. If you're not aware, the Genova, released in the summer of last year, is the first two-wheel drive off-road buggy from Japanese maker G-Force. Now, it was aimed at beginner to intermediate users with a price point that put it midway between budget offerings from Tamiya and then the high-end buggies from the likes of Yokomo. Now, with vintage styling cues and support from world-famous Masami Hirosaka, the Genova has quickly gained a huge following here in Japan, and I think other Japanese manufacturers have been taking note. Now, sadly, the Genova is still only officially sold in Japan, but there are ways and means to get one abroad if you're interested. So, I personally think that Kyosho saw how popular the Genova was and decided they needed something to compete. Enter the Dirt Master. Now, just as an aside, I think G-Force have succeeded in kickstarting a trend over here, a trend of offering competent, modern-day designed off-road buggies with retro styling that appeals to those of us that grew up during the heyday of the hobby. Consequently, I don't think it's a coincidence that Tamiya are also about to release their own mid-tier, vintagely styled buggy, the BBX, that's coming soon. Anyway, back to the Dirt Master. It's essentially an older RB5 buggy that has been fitted with what Kyosho call a neo-retro design body, and then the materials and specs modified to bring the price point in line with the Genova. Essentially, that meant Kyosho had to replace many of the alloy parts on the higher spec RB5 with plastic parts on the Dirt Master. And that brings me to one of the first negatives of the Dirt Master, the plastic. Now, I've got nothing against plastic, and the plastic used on the Dirt Master is of the highest quality I have ever seen on an RC kit. But now that I've built the buggy, it seems like in order to match the price point of the Genova, Kyosho really had to go to extremes when replacing metal and alloy parts with plastic ones. Almost everything that can be plastic is plastic, and that includes most spacers, bushings, etc., and even extends to the nuts that secure the shocks onto the damper stays. Now, plastic nuts are something I've only ever recall seeing in a Grasshopper, and at this price point it's a little disappointing if I'm honest. Not only that, but other items, most notably shock oil, is absent from this kit, which I can only assume is the result of Kyosho's aggressive efforts to bring the price point of the Dirt Master in line with that of the Genova. Now onto the build. I talked about this a little in my previous video, but to recap, I'm not a fan of the way Kyosho have done it. As I've just stated, there is a lot of plastic in this kit, so it seems crazy that none of the parts trees have any kind of markings on them. There are no numbers or letters or anything. Kyosho instead give you some reference diagrams which you constantly have to keep flipping back to in order to find the part you need. For parts that have distinctive shapes, it's a non-issue, but the Dirt Master includes many spacers and bushings of differing thicknesses, and finding the correct one can take a lot longer than it needs to. This is compounded by the fact that as the build progresses, this becomes more and more tedious as the parts trees start to resemble less and less what they originally looked like. Aside from that though, the build was straightforward. A few pointers: be careful not to over tighten the diff case screws. If you do, the diff will start to become very stiff, and be warned that you're probably going to have sore fingers by the time you've finished putting together all the turnbuckles. Also, the shocks are completely plastic and the threads are very fine, so it'd be very easy to cross thread the shock caps, so be careful when you're doing those. Oh, and finally, make sure you've got some shock oil handy, because there is none included in the kit. So now that the build is done, what do I think? Well, my short answer is that it's very good. Despite all the plastic, it has a few shortcomings, but overall, if you're looking for something that has more adjustability and performance potential than say one of Tamiya's budget friendly entry kits, but you aren't quite ready to spend high and money, then seriously consider picking one of these up. Now for the long answer, and to proceed, I really need to compare the Dirt Master with its main rival, the Genova. Now, I'm aware that the Genova is not available outside of Japan, but it's clear that these two are very similar in a lot of ways. So if you had the choice of the Dirt Master or Genova, which should you choose? Well, like so many things, the answer is not clear cut, and a lot will depend on the aspects of buggies that you feel are more important. So in the interest of brevity, I'm going to quickly go through and note the things that really stood out to me as differences between the Dirt Master and Genova, and in no particular order. The Dirt Master does not have full bearings. It has bearings in the transmission drivetrain only. There are no bearings for the steering system. So if you want to convert to a full bearing specification, you're going to need to pick up 6 extra bearings, 2 of which are flanged bearings. The Genova, however, is full bearings in the steering and transmission. The Dirt Master has more adjustability for suspension in stock form than the Genova. The Dirt Master also includes steel suspension pins, whereas the Genova has screw pin fittings. Perhaps the big one, and something that a lot of people will latch onto, the Dirt Master has hex screws throughout, whereas the Genova uses Phillips JIS screws. Now, in Genova's favor, it does include universals at the rear, which for a two-wheel drive buggy is not a huge benefit, but it's worth mentioning. The Genova also has a full metal drivetrain, so with the exception of the spur gear, all of the gears in the gearbox are metal. And by the way, the gearbox on the Genova does come partially assembled. If you want to know more about Genova, I've got a few videos. I'll put links in the description below, so go check those out. A few other things that stood out: the Dirt Master has fully adjustable shocks. They are plastic, but they are fully adjustable. However, the Genova, in order to adjust preload, you have to use Tamiya style clips. Shock quality between the two is very similar, and that extends also to most of the parts as well. The thickness of, for example, suspension arms, shock towers, etc. are very similar between the two buggies. There's not really a lot in it. Space for electronics, again similar. You will have no problem putting high-end electronics into either buggy. So that brings me on to value for money. The two buggies are essentially the same price, so from a value standpoint, which one is better? For me personally, there isn't much in it, but if I had to choose one, I'd say the Genova, despite the lack of its hex screws, offers slightly better value for money with its included full bearings, universals, metal gears, and of course shock oil, but there isn't really a lot in it. Next up, looks. This is totally subjective. When I first set these two down side by side, I definitely preferred the looks of the Genova, but as time passes, I'm finding I like the looks of the Dirt Master more and more. The Genova certainly has a more retro vibe going for it, and I do wish that Kyosho had put a little more effort into making the Dirt Master retro looking. I know they're not to everyone's taste, but it would have been great if it had a few more retro styling cues, such as a driver figure. No worries though, I guess Tamiya are gonna take up the slack with their very cool looking retro styled BBX that's coming out soon. Now, as for spares, the Genovas tend to be a little on the pricier side, but still reasonable. Kyosho lists option parts for the Dirt Master at the back of the manual. Now, as an aside, you can download the manual directly from Kyosho if you're interested, but most of the spares listed are pinions and spurs, a ball diff upgrade, and a few other bits and pieces. So there's not a lot of carbon or alloy replacement parts, at least I didn't see any. But given that the Dirt Master has RB5 roots, I'd imagine that many of the RB5 parts and options will work on the Dirt Master with little to no modification. I do believe Gavin over at RC Kicks has some RB5 parts lined up, and he intends to put them on his Dirtmaster when it eventually arrives in the UK. And that brings me on to performance. Now before I go any further, I had intended to install the exact same electronics in both of the buggies in order to have the fairest comparison possible. However, unfortunately, the motor that I'm using in the Genova, which is the Neofast GeForce Neofast brushless combo, a 17.5 turn brushless motor and ESC, I couldn't put it into the Dirtmaster. The main issue being that the shaft on the Neofast motor is a little bit on the short side, and I wasn't able to use the kit pinion that came with the Dirtmaster, and all of the other pinions that I have to hand, they don't quite fit either. So I ended up putting in a G15 single from Kyosho. I use the same motor in my Ultima. It's a very fast motor, and I'm also using it's basically Kyosho's rebranded Hobby Ring 1060. So the Dirtmaster is running brush motor Hobby Ring 1060 on 2S LiPo, and the Genova is running the GeForce 17.5 turn brushless system with 2S LiPo. I'm probably going to have to dial back the endpoints on the Dirtmaster just to keep the top speed somewhat similar, because I suspect that the G15 single, even though it's a very cheap motor, is very, very quick, and it's going to be considerably faster than the motor in the Genova. So without further ado, we're going to head outside. I'm going to do some testing. Welcome to the park, and welcome to the running portion of my Dirtmaster review. Now, everything I've said so far in this review was recorded before I was able to take the Dirtmaster out for its shakedown run. Now, I had planned on using the raw audio that I recorded at the park, but there was just so much ambient noise, background noise. It was a busy park, it was Sunday, there's a baseball field just nearby, so you'll have to make do with yet another voiceover. So I've been running the Dirtmaster and the Genova back to back all morning, and what can I tell you? Well, as expected, the G15 single fitted to the Dirtmaster was way quicker than the 17.5 brushes set up in the Genova. I mean, it was almost comical. The Dirtmaster would leave the Genova in the dust. I really think the cheap and cheerful G15 motor from Kyosho is highly underrated, I feel anyway. Yeah, it's a brush motor, sealed end can, but for what you pay for it over here in Japan, it's like less than 2,000 yen. The performance is excellent. So what I ended up doing to even things out, I had to dial back the throttle endpoint on the Dirtmaster by quite a bit. It was something like 58% or something like that. So what you're looking at is a little cone course that I set up to get a better idea of how well they handle. The course is a little bit smaller than I'd like, but if I made it any larger, I wouldn't be able to fit everything into the frame. Now, the surface is loose, dead grass with plenty of fine gravel mixed in, so there isn't much in the way of grip. By the way, this is not an excuse, but I've recently been running a lot on an indoor high grip carpet track, so I'm a little bit out of practice when it comes to driving on loose, low grip surfaces. So what can I tell you? What am I noticing? Well, at my skill level and in these conditions, there isn't really much difference in handling and performance between the two, and what little difference there is most likely down to tires more than anything else. I noticed the Genova had more understeer when on power than the Dirtmaster, whereas the Dirtmaster had more understeer. It was more noticeable understeer off throttle. Overall, I felt the Dirtmaster turned slightly better, probably helped by its shorter wheelbase. The rear tires on the Genova are much more aggressive. The pin pattern is much more aggressive, and if you look, you can see that the tracks left by the Genova are much more pronounced, and certainly the tires on the Genova are more suited to the surfaces I'm running on. So I got a lot better grip, and that translated to better acceleration off the line. I did notice that the Dirtmaster, it would tend to spin out a bit more. I think I could tune it a bit better, and perhaps slightly thicker grease in the diff. At the moment, it's just built to kit with the kit supplied grease. Now, I felt that on the rougher terrain, the slightly better dampers of the Dirtmaster helped, and it seemed to absorb impacts better. I may need to do something with the Genova dampers though, because lately I've noticed they don't rebound as much as they used to. The Genova dampers weren't fantastic to begin with, but I think mine are due for a bit of an overhaul. Now, I did about 30 laps of the concourse with both buggies, and in the end, the Dirt Master lapped with an average lap time of around 11.22 seconds compared to 11.51 for the Genova. So yeah, there's nothing in it. Mostly my driving tyre choice. Yeah, there's not much in it. So what else can I tell you about the Dirt Master? Well, as is often the case, I find that, and this is not a dig at anyone who chooses to keep their cars as shelf queens and never run them. As far as I'm concerned, it's your car, it's your buggy, do with it what you want, keep it on the shelf, run it, bash it, it's completely up to you. But I find that you never truly know or can judge a car until you've run it. You could have the most amazing looking buggy that has top-notch build quality using all the best materials, a true marvel of engineering. For example, the Tamiya Avanti, that comes to mind. But once you run it, your perception, your feelings can change. For a lot of buggies that I've built, it's the same thing. I finish the build and form in my mind an opinion on how much I like it, but that opinion usually changes once I take it out and run it. Now, sometimes it's for the better and sometimes it's for the worse. As an example, the Optima Mid was a dream car of mine back in the day, and I was so happy when I finally got one. It was an absolute joy to build, the materials are top notch, but when I ran it, I just didn't connect to it. It's hard to put into words. It's not that I disliked it, it just left me feeling a bit cold. The Sand Scorcher, however, is the complete opposite. You know, the design is ancient, the chassis has no rigidity whatsoever, and by every measure, it's a poorly handling buggy. But the first time I drove it, I just fell in love with it. I love everything about it, and it never fails to bring the huge smile to my face. And that's what's happened here. Before I took them out, I would have said that the Genova was my favourite. But now that I've ran them back to back, I'm finding that I personally like the Dirt Master more. It's not that the Genova is a bad buggy, far from it. It's a fantastic machine with many good things going for it. And to be honest, there isn't much difference between the two, but for whatever reason, I'm finding that I prefer the Dirt Master. So my final thoughts on the Dirt Master, well, as you can probably tell, I really like it. It has more performance potential than cheaper offerings from Tamiya, and although it doesn't really have the uniqueness and character of the TD2, it is probably the better choice if you plan to race it at a circuit or track. It's also a lot cheaper than most high-end options from the likes of Yokomo, Schumacher, Team Associated, etc. If you do have the option to get a Genova for a similar price, I'd say just go with either. They're so close in terms of build and performance. You really just go on looks more than anything else. I'll leave you with one final thought. Regular viewers to my channel will have probably noticed that the livery that I chose for the Dirt Master is quite similar to that of my Scorpion re-release. That wasn't by accident. It occurred to me that for just a little bit more money, over here the Scorpion retails for around 31,000 yen, you could buy a Scorpion. Of course, it doesn't have the performance or adjustability or modern design of the Dirt Master, but it's a much more enjoyable build and just has heaps of nostalgia. Something to think about. Overall, the Dirt Master is an excellent buggy and something you should seriously consider if you want to pick up something that's got more performance but you're not willing to pay high-end money. Well, that's all from me. My name is David. You've been watching Kai City RC. I'll catch you in the next one.